Hello, Tech Pros, episode 215.
Don't limit yourself by thinking of yourself as an emotionless robot whose sole purpose on earth is to crank out code.
Welcome to the podcast where I chat with professionals who are getting the job done using technology 7 days a week. Each week, we start with Motivation Monday. Tuesday is about productivity, Wednesday, leadership, Thursday, technology, Friday, people and communication, Saturday, entrepreneurship, and Sunday, being unplugged. All right, let's get started. Hello, Tech Pros. This is Chad Bostic, and I'm excited to introduce our featured guest today, Coraline Ada Ehmke. Happy Friday, everyone. Coraline.
Thank you. Happy Friday, Chad.
Are you ready for the weekend?
I am. I'm going to a costume party on Saturday, which I'm super excited about.
Oh, that's amazing. Awesome. Cool. So this is, when we're recording this is right at the end of the month, right at the end of October, and it is that season for costumes. I've always loved costume parties, but oh my gosh, I'm laughing at myself right now because of all the social anxieties that I've had over the years. I never really attended many parties when I was a kid, and now I feel bad. So anytime we can dress up, me and my wife and my daughter all go out to take my kid around the block or something like that. It's always good times. I love it.
My daughter's 20, and Halloween is still our favorite holiday.
Nice, fantastic. The family that dresses up silly and has silly times together, stays together.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about. Well, Coraline Ada Ehmke is a speaker, writer, teacher, open source advocate, and technologist with 20 years of experience in developing apps for the web. She works diligently to promote diversity and inclusivity in open source and tech industries. She is the creator of the Contributor Covenant, the most popular open source code of conduct in the world with over 15,000 adoptions, including JRuby, Swift, F#, and Rails. Coraline works for GitHub as a senior engineer on a team devoted to creating community management and anti-harassment tools. So Coraline, man, that's amazing stuff that you're working on. 15,000 adoptions, and specifically around the code of conduct. I can't speak today, but code of conduct. Why work in this space? Why is this so important to you?
Sure. Well, I have benefited my entire career from open source, and started contributing to open source in the 90s when I was still a Perl hacker. And really, the internet as we know it today is built on open source. Apache remains, and the LAMP stack remain the most popular way to get content and functionality on the web. And open source, of course, is a volunteer effort, and open source very much shapes the technologies that we use every day and the kinds of problems that we solve. And I think it's really important that we, just as we have very diverse consumers of technology, I think it's important to make space for very diverse producers of technology. And frankly, the open source world is not out of the box very welcoming and inclusive and diverse. So I took it upon myself to see what I could do to make that different and make that better for people. So
that's a very interesting dilemma that we have, right? Because we hear about certain companies or certain industries over the years, including, unfortunately, IT and unfortunately technology, where sometimes it can be perceived or very much directed as it's a boys club or it's a girls club or it's just for this particular whatever style of living or whatever the situation is, right? And I am a firm believer in diversity across the board. I think it really breaks the boundaries and helps innovation, right? Because when I think about the things that I like and I know and I trust and just the things that define me as Chad, then I'm limited to solutions that are only within the things that Chad can think of, right? But when
you're solving problems for yourself, right?
Exactly. So tell us about, in the open source community, why we need more diversity there.
Well, you touched on it a bit. People tend to solve their own problems. And I think Silicon Valley is rife with lots of companies springing up to solve the problems of frankly, the average white guy. And there's a whole host of problems that different kinds of people face that need to be addressed as well, and that have a technology component to them. But people really can't, it's really hard to think about the problems that people different from you face So you really need a diversity of participation in the technology world. And also, I think even on a team that is solving a particular problem, maybe that's fairly well known, you want diverse perspectives on solutions to that problem, because we've seen examples of things like facial recognition software not working for people of color. And that's because the teams that built that software didn't have any people of color on the team, so it was never tested on them. So there are lots of examples where not seeking out diverse opinions or diverse experiences or participation really cause technology projects to fail.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes so much sense. So tell us, what is the open source code of conduct? So we want diversity, yes, but what specifically is in the code of conduct that we need to prescribe to and follow those rules?
Sure. A code of conduct serves a few different purposes. First of all, for people who are marginalized in tech, it is a signal that their participation is welcome, that the project maintainers intend for the project to be an environment where everyone can contribute and everyone is made to feel welcome and safe, and that certain behaviors won't be tolerated, certain discriminatory behaviors won't be tolerated. The second purpose for a code of conduct in an open source project is to define what the community standards are. Anytime you get a group of people together who are organizing themselves behind an idea, there are going to be values that these people bring to the table. And it's really the job of the project maintainer to decide what the core values for a given effort are, to make sure that everyone is really aware of, what kind of environment the maintainer is trying to create and what kind of solutions they're looking for and what sort of processes they're looking for. And finally, a code of conduct, an effective code of conduct, outlines what to do in case something happens. So it may be an instance of, insensitive language being used, or someone being made to feel uncomfortable, or even something as bad as outright harassment. Defining the process, defining a fair process, and making it very visible ensures that everyone who's involved knows that they'll be treated fairly and knows exactly what to expect should, unfortunately, something bad happen.
I think that's so important because, depending on how you were raised, depending on the environment that you grew up in, where you went to school, just all these kinds of things, we see so many examples of bad behavior that's not called out as bad behavior, right? And sometimes when we go to when this behavior is called out, it's like, hey, what you said there was insensitive. What you did there was a complete dirtbag thing to do, right? You need to, we need to address this. And I've seen a lot of people get really, really defensive, going, "No, it wasn't. That was not harassment. I wasn't, picking on any individual in general. I wasn't picking on any groups. I said X, Y, Z, and what I meant by it was this and that." It's like, no, look, you're not coming to it from the other person's perspective. You're coming to it from your own limitations, from your perspective. So I get you,
there's an expression that intent is not magic. And the great example of this is because sometimes people will get defensive and they'll say, "Well, I didn't mean to offend you," or "I didn't mean to say something insensitive." And really, intent comes down to your character, and what is actually happening is you're addressing conduct. So if you rear end someone on the freeway, your intent was not to cause an accident, but there's still consequences of the action that you took, and those consequences have to be dealt with. And if there is a procedure for dealing with those consequences that is designed to be fair and equitable, then it benefits everyone.
I love that example. I've never heard that example before. So I completely agree, right? The intent is not magic. You can't really see and peer into someone's heart and see what they really meant to do. But what you can do is say, hey, there's an outcome. Like, it doesn't matter if you intended to rear end somebody or not. Because of your actions, there was hurt, and that hurt needs to be addressed, and we need to figure out what to do about it. So can you give us some really solid examples here of some types of articles that are in the code of conduct, of maybe some behaviors to watch out for and look out for that most people are not talking about? Maybe it's like something we don't usually say or something we don't usually do, to really call this stuff out, because we want to hold ourselves up to this conduct.
Sure. There are a couple of examples that are, I think, great examples of people just not realizing the consequences of the power of words. I remember a few years back, there was an open source repository, an open source project rather, that had really great documentation, but the pronouns that were used throughout were all masculine pronouns. So it was always, when the user does this, he will see that, and that can be othering for people who don't identify as male. And it's not an egregious breach of etiquette, but it can be made better. So there was a person who took it upon themselves to make all the language in the documentation gender neutral using them and they. And the owner of the project actually fought back against it and said that that was an inconsequential change and they wouldn't merge the pull request. One of the other maintainers went ahead and merged it, and that original owner actually rolled back the change because they were so angry about being challenged on this front. And that was pretty petty. Another one that we see being talked about a little bit more recently is use of master-slave technology. Those are perfectly legitimate words in the English dictionary, and there are definitely the use of those words, maybe the intent is not to call to mind a really dark period in American history, but for people of color, that is a pretty bad reminder of how things used to be, and it's really insensitive. And so there are lots of alternatives to master-slave, and some people actually fight back against it, and that's a great example of like not really having empathy for people, unlike people who are different than you. And there are really simple things that we can address to make people feel more welcome, and yet a lot of people will push back on that.
Man, it's just like really opening my eyes to to my history. I'm a white dude, right? And there are probably times in my life, times in my career where, not out of spite, not out of malice, but just out of ignorance, I have probably done things, I have probably said things, I've probably checked in code. I'll be honest, I didn't write a lot of documentation, period, regardless of what pronouns I used. But I probably did some things that, looking back, was not in everyone's best interest, right? It was just coming out of my own ignorance and my own limited experiences. So once we see this in the environment, once we see this in the workplace, that this is going on, whether it directly offends or affects us, or whether it doesn't, right? Because we could say, hey, you know what? We need to change this documentation to be gender neutral for future people who read this. It doesn't offend or affect me, but whatever. Like, let's change it anyway. It doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what's right? So what can we do to really stand up to that kind of behavior and call it out in the workplace without really bashing people at the same time?
Sure. One of the important things to remember, if you are responding to language or behavior or activity that you think might be problematic, is to talk about the action, talk about the consequences of that action, and not the person. So it's not very good to say you are sexist or you are being sexist, because that's going to put people on the defensive. And alternatively, if you say, what you said could be construed as being sexist, or maybe it's offensive to some people, and here's why. That's talking about the behavior, and people generally are more open to changing their behavior than having their actual personality or character judged. So that can be really good. But I think a couple of things I wanted to touch on. It's really important for people who are not the ones affected to speak up when they see things that can be out of line, because a lot of people who are marginalized may not feel safe speaking up. They may not feel safe calling someone out. So it's really important to have allies and to have people who are thinking about these things and trying to see things from different perspectives. And what that comes down to is having empathy. Now, as software developers, we sort of have this idealized notion of a programmer as an emotionless robot who is just producing code, and we're judging each other simply by our intellectual output. And that's sort of a basic tenet of meritocracy. But what that means is that we're not being encouraged to show empathy, to practice empathy. We're not being encouraged to bring our whole selves to bear, and to really tap into our experiences and tap into the experiences and gifts that other people have. I really think that most software problems come down to people problems, and then your people skills are really important. And the most important skill that you have in all of your interpersonal relationships is empathy.
So, Coraline, that is so enlightening. I mean, I'm looking back over the course of my life, and you know what? I tried to be an emotionless robot throughout my life, specifically because I didn't know it at the time, but I had social anxiety. And because of my social anxieties, I felt extremely uncomfortable around people, and I felt very comfortable around technology. So it was kind of like Spock on Star Trek, right? If I can just devoid myself of all emotions and not get upset and not get mad and not get happy and not get excited and not get anything at work, basically only communicate in like a data pattern mechanism, then life is good, career is good, and everything's fine. And what I discovered with just for me is it was very, very sad, depressing state of being, right? When you're coming into work and you're never showing any emotion, and you're never getting excited, you're never getting scared, you're never getting upset, because you're not acting like a human, and those emotions are real and they're necessary. So I love the fact that you're saying, no, like bring those emotions, but specifically bring the empathy, because we don't talk about that at work. We don't talk, or at least the companies that I've worked for, and they're great companies, but we don't talk about, hey, empathizing with the other people around you. Like how does that work, like on an individual basis, when you see somebody coming in and really empathizing with another individual? What does that do?
Well, it creates a connection. I think something that's really important. We have a lot of people coming into technology and coming into open source, maybe from other professions, bootcamp graduates or people who are self-taught and so on. And there's a lot of talk about making sure that there is safety for failure, right? We want to create places that are safe to fail. And I think another really important characteristic of an environment, a working environment that is actually going to help people grow, is creating a space where it's safe to be vulnerable, where it's safe to have those emotions and express those emotions. And in order to create that safety, you have to respond in an appropriate way. I really think what's called for is a degree of emotional maturity that we really don't encourage in our profession. I'm actually working on a book right now called The Compassionate Coder, and it talks a lot about empathy in the workplace, in open source, in our interpersonal relationships. I read a great book called The Art of Empathy, and the author made this sort of aside that basically emotions are neurological programs. And that really inspired me. So I wrote an entire chapter where I break down common emotions like anger or fear or jealousy into state machine diagrams. And so every node is like a point in time where you're reacting to a given emotion. So there's like a trigger for the emotion, and there's this decision point, this inflection point where you can decide, are you going to recognize anger as a violation of a boundary and work to address that and restore that boundary? Or are you going to let anger take over your reactions and lead to resentment or lead to breaking down in communication or some other negative outcome? So we can be rational about our emotions, but we still have to identify that they exist and that they play a valuable role in our humanity. And I'm hoping that chapter in particular will appeal to programmers who maybe are used to thinking more logically or prefer to think more logically about things, to see that, with every emotion, with every reaction, there's a choice involved. And you can choose the best outcome, or you can choose to ignore the emotion and deal with that consequence, or you can let the emotion dominate you. And really, there's only one good outcome from that sort of choice.
Yeah, absolutely, man. This is so important. Please share that information with the world, because it is so vitally important that we need to talk about this stuff. I mean, speaking from an anxiety perspective, from a fear perspective, fear of judgment, fear of making a fool of myself, all that kind of stuff, is it those emotions can elicit a fight, flight, freeze response, right? Naturally.
Sure.
And you tend to have one of the responses that is like your go-to, just because the way that you were wired up when you were a kid, or the early environment that you were in, it caused you to lean towards one of those three responses. And so for me, it was like deer in the headlights, right? So
Sure.
some people can get very, very defensive no matter what you say. It's just like they take it as a personal attack, and they get super, super defensive. And they're like, no, this is why, blah, 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 blah. And then other people just like, they ignore you, they leave the room, they run away, they don't respond, which is very similar to the freeze in my case. But I would literally just stand there or sit there and look at my feet and wonder to myself, oh my gosh, I'm melting. Like, I'm going to fall apart. Like, this is no good. I'm going to explode. Like, something bad is going to happen to the universe. And it's a natural response. But as your point, very, very valid, is there's another choice. Yes, that emotion will hit you and you will get it, but you can choose to take a deep breath and, okay, now I see and I understand that this emotion is happening, but what is the right response to that emotion? What can I do about it?
Definitely.
Awesome.
And it's important to note, I think some people think that, well, I just can't deal with this. I just can't deal with emotions, or, my instinct is to behave in this way. And they don't realize that emotional maturity is something that can be learned, and it's something that has to be practiced. So, we may or may not be born with empathy, but it's definitely a skill that we can develop, and we owe it to ourselves to do that.
Well, Coraline, in just a moment, I want to talk to you about the communities and the anti-harassment tools that you guys are developing over there at GitHub. But first, we're going to take a quick break and thank our sponsors. This episode of Hello Tech Pros is sponsored by Minio Cloud Storage. Minio is a cloud object storage server for developers and DevOps written in Go. The Go programming language is the emerging language of choice for modern cloud infrastructure projects, and it allows Minio to be highly concurrent and lightweight. Minio is Amazon S3 compatible, built with microstorage architecture in mind, but at its heart, Minio is simple, scalable, and supported by a passionate developer and user community. In episode 89 of Hello Tech Pros, I talked with A.B. Periasamy, one of the founders of Minio, about the importance of community support and recruiting software developers who are as passionate about their product's code as artists are of their art. Check out that episode at hellotechpros.com/89 and check out Minio Cloud Storage at minio.io. That's minio.io. Are you new to podcasting? Are you looking for a fast, high-quality, yet budget-friendly podcast production team? Let TransSource Media take care of you. With a team of professional audio and video editors, writers, and graphic artists, they can help you build your podcast from planning, post-production, and platform submission. Using only cutting-edge software and studio equipment, they're here to make each and every show sound at its best. To get a free quote, please visit www.transsourcemedia.com or send them an email at marketing@transsourcemedia.com or call them at 209-505-5693. TransSource Media, transforming businesses through the power of multimedia. Okay, we're back with Coraline Ada Ehmke, who is a speaker, writer, teacher, and open source advocate. We've been talking to Coraline about why it's so important to have empathy at work. If you're a software developer, or if you're a technical professional, if you're a database administrator, a server admin, a tech lead, we need to start treating each other as people, as real humans with real emotions, and deal with the emotions that come up in the office. For instance, like if somebody calls you out on your behavior and says, "Hey, that was insensitive," just like be open to that. Don't reject what they're saying, right? It doesn't matter what your intentions are. It matters what happens and the outcome. So, Coraline, you're working on some community management and some anti-harassment tools over at GitHub. Tell us about that. What are the tools that you guys are building?
Sure. I'm part of a new team. We're about 8 months old at this point, called Community and Safety. Interestingly, my team, although we are an engineering team, is not part of the engineering group at all. We're actually put under operations because GitHub has decided that things like creating a safe environment and giving project owners tools to curate their communities is just as important as uptime and just as important as data integrity. So that's quite a commitment that GitHub is making to this concept. So what we're doing is trying to create an environment like GitHub. Our tagline is social coding, and we really believe that GitHub is about creating communities of developers around open source projects and around ideas and around technologies. And we want to empower people who are creating these communities and managing these communities everything that they need to keep those communities safe and make sure that everyone feels welcome to participate and that great code is being produced. So things happen. We're humans, and human interactions can sometimes get ugly or uncomfortable. So we want to, provide some tools that let project owners deal with the crisis as it emerges. So things like shutting down comments on an issue from accounts that were created within the last 24 hours. Sometimes what people will do is what's called dogpiling. Well, they'll create a bunch of junk accounts to harass or flood a maintainer with comments or to do other behavior that's like not very productive. We also want to build things like allowing a project maintainer to have a way of saying thank you to first-time contributors, or to easily mark issues as beginner-friendly. So different ways to encourage good behavior. Currently working on a tool that will let project maintainers very easily select from and add and customize a code of conduct for their projects. So that's sort of on the community management side. On the anti-harassment side, it was kind of interesting. The first feature that I shipped at GitHub was actually closing down a harassment vector that had been used against me in a previous year.
Wow.
Someone had created about a dozen repositories with blatantly racist names and added me to all of those repositories. So in the day or day and a half that it took for support to delete those repos and deal with that problem, I actually had racial slurs on my GitHub profile, which was horrible. And harassers are so clever; they will find a way to use whatever existing technology to cause problems for people. So the first feature that I shipped was repository invitations. So if someone tries to add you to a repository now, you get an email, and there are buttons right within the email to accept the invitation, reject the invitation, or block the inviter as a spam. So it was a great feeling knowing that no one would be harassed in that particular way using that particular technique ever again, and that was a great first ship.
That's awesome. I mean, congratulations. That is really, really cool to do that. But it sucks that you had to go through that in order for that situation to be resolved. And I'm trying to use my empathy right now to get into the mind of the harasser. And I can't. I'm having a hard time getting there. I have been defensive in the past. I have fought back and I have said some dumb things in the past. But to do something of that magnitude, like create fake accounts, create fake repos, like say a bunch of stuff on there and tag people just to harass them, I don't get it. What causes people? Do you have any clue what causes people to lash out like that?
There's some really toxic places on the internet. 4chan's a great example of that. The Gamergate community, for the most part, is a great example of that. And I think one of the problems is you get people together who feel like they're being attacked. They feel because there are people who are working to change the status quo. They get defensive about it, and they feel like, oh, social justice warriors are trying to invade open source or trying to take over Ruby or what have you, and they lash out. And what happens when you get a group of people together who have this same shared fear? Harassment becomes a game. It's really gamified because they will organize their efforts on message boards, and they will try and one up each other in terms of who can cause harm or cause fear or cause anxiety for the people that they see as coming after them. And it's true that people are coming after them because if they are part of the status quo, if they are people who engage in damaging behavior on purpose, yes, they're being targeted because there's a growing feeling that that these sorts of behaviors aren't going to be tolerated anymore, and there are people who are working to change that. So I think it's a fear reaction and also an echo chamber and also gamification of harassment. Those are three factors that come into play here.
What about the anonymity, right? So people that are hiding behind screen names that aren't tied to like real live, hey, this is Chad Bostic talking to you live with my voice, with my real name, right? I don't know very many people who would like stand up in a public setting and do that kind of junk, and because it's a dirtbag move, right? Yeah. Is it because they have a little bit of anonymity because they're on the internet, or do you think these people would do the same kind of stuff like to your face, like in a restaurant or in a lunchroom or something like that?
I think anonymity lends them some confidence in a lot of cases. To be clear, I think anonymity on the internet is critical.
Yeah,
it is something that is necessary for a lot of people's personal safety. But yeah, it does encourage people to behave in ways that, because they're free of consequences, right? Their employer isn't going to know, oh my God, this person is a flaming racist, or this person has doxed someone. So there's some safety in that anonymity, definitely.
Yeah, there's good and bad, no matter how you look at it, and it really comes down to the choices that you make and how you want to live your life. For me, I choose the positive, I choose the light, and I want to do whatever I can to help out in this situation. So, there's probably a lot of folks like that listening into the call who are like, okay, I want to help. How can I help? So, Coraline, before we go, can you share any parting words of wisdom that you have for our audience, the best way that we can connect with you, and then we'll say goodbye.
Sure. I just want to reiterate that empathy is something that can be learned, and that empathy is something that must be practiced in order for you to get good at it. And don't be daunted. Don't limit yourself by thinking of yourself as an emotionless robot whose sole purpose on earth is to crank out code, because that means you're not bringing your whole self to bear. And your whole self is something that's really valuable and something that should be treasured and something you should feel really comfortable with. So I would encourage everyone listening to think about that a little bit. I'm happy to continue the conversation. You can find out about my work and read my blog posts and find out read articles and interviews at my website, which has the best vanity URL ever, where.coraline.codes. And Twitter is probably the best way to get in touch with me. I'm at Coraline Ada.
Well, Coraline, thank you so much for joining me on Hello Tech Pros today. This is a much needed conversation that people need to hear and people need to participate in. So I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing this information with us today.
Very happy to be here. Thank you so much, Chad.
Awesome. Tech Pros, man, just, you know what? If you're a podcaster, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out here to get this code of conduct, and I'm going to take a look at it, and maybe I'll work with Coraline off the air. And I want to see if there's anything like this for podcasters, right? Because if there's not, I want to be the first one that has like an open source code of conduct for podcasters of how we're going to act on the mic and how we're going to act off the mic and how we're going to treat each other, and the kinds of things that we're going to promote and the diversity and inclusivity that we're going to have on Hello Tech Pros, because that's what I'm all about. I have spent most of my entire career trying to behave like a soulless, emotionless robot. As Coraline says, that's no good. It's no good at all. I did not bring my full true self to most of the companies that I work for, most of the jobs, and only very small instances did I have enough willpower to get over the anxiety to really share myself and be a human in front of a lot of people. But now I'm changing. This is a huge change in my life, and I invite you to go check out that open source code of conduct and apply it to your work in your position, no matter where it is, whether you're a software developer in a company for somebody else, if you're a founder starting your startup, if you're another podcaster. We need to adopt these codes of conducts and really make them make sure that people are aware that we're going to follow them, right? Because I want you guys and gals to hold me accountable to me saying this right here, right now, today. Thank you. You've been listening to Coraline Ada Ehmke, and I'm Chad Bostic. And until next time, take care. The show notes page for this episode can be found at hellotechpros.com/215. Do you use Slack for team communication? Join the Hello Tech Pros Slack channel at hellotechpros.com/Slack. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review, subscribe to this channel, and check back tomorrow. This has been People Friday, but tomorrow my featured guest and I discuss entrepreneurship. On Sunday, being unplugged. Monday, motivation. Tuesday, productivity. Wednesday, leadership. Thursday, technology. And then back again on Friday to talk people and communication. And I'll talk to you tomorrow.